additional full-time TSOs to the workforce. The figure represents the decrease in the size of TSA workforce since 2011 as passenger volume has grown 15%. AFG also calls on Congress to end the arbitrary and severe cap on full-time TSOs. When Congress voted to divert 60 cents of the $5.60 security fee per enplanement to the Treasury rather than TSA, it deprived the agency of $1.25 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars each year. It is time for Congress to dedicate the proceeds of the security fee to TSA to be used for its intended purpose, funding the agency's security mission and hiring staff. Introducing airline and airport employees and private contract employees into the framework of checkpoint security is, at best, a temporary bandage. Years of on-the-job experience and commitment to the public are the services that are lost when the TSO workforce is replaced with airport and airline employees. Airport authorities should be aware that they're not going to get more screeners under the Screening Partnership Program and that there are long checkpoint waits at airports with private screeners. Despite the importance of their work, TSOs receive second-class treatment from their employer, the federal government. TSA is the only federal agency that is allowed to excuse itself from the fundamental workplace rights and protections found in Title V of the U.S. Code. TSA does not follow the Fair Labor Standards Act and the Office of Personnel Management guidelines on leave. TSA does not have statutory Title VII protections against discrimination, and they are not paid under the general schedule like the majority of federal workforce. TSOs lack the ability to appeal adverse personnel actions to a neutral third party like the Merit System Protection Board, even though TSA management has that right. To paraphrase the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., justice delayed has been justice denied to the TSO workforce. It is well within the authority of both the Congress and TSA to provide TSOs the same workplace rights and protections as other federal workers. We urge Administrator Neffinger to apply Title V rights and protections to the TSO workforce. Congress should pass H.R. 4488, the Rights of Transportation Security Officers Act, introduced by Representative Benny Thompson and Nita Loy. The bill requires that TSA follow the same workplace rules as most agencies in the federal government. Congress should also ensure funding to TSA to provide 5% retention raises to TSOs who have been on the job for 2 or more years. Transportation security officers do all they can to screen passengers. That is why AFG pledges to work with TSA, Congress, and the public on solutions for the long lines. And Mr. Chairman, AFGE is asking and seeking a seat at the table to be part of the solution, not part of the problem in what we are currently experiencing in TSA. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify today. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cox, for your testimony. We appreciate you being here today. And before I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions, I do want to note that it's very interesting that part-time employee attrition rate is nearly triple that of full-time employees at TSA. And that's something I want to talk about in a few moments' time. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. One of the overarching observations from speaking to you last week, all at the panel, two things. TSA, expansion of TSA is critically important, and also field service directors. It was a revelation to all of us that field service directors really have their hands tied to some extent with respect to making staff and allocation decisions, and oftentimes are not interacting in an appropriate manner with the airports and airlines in the field. So our bill addresses all of those things, but I do want to flesh them out a little bit. And I'll start with the TSA PreCheck program. Ms. Callahan, you stated that 40% now of the Syracuse airport is on PreCheck.
That's correct.
What type of an impact has that had on the airport and the throughput of passengers?
We're seeing wait times on average of anywhere between 12 and 15 minutes. When I flew out this morning, I had a first experience seeing that, and it really has helped to balance the distribution of pre-check and non-pre-check employees during those peak periods, which for us is really 4:30 until about 7 a.m.
Right. Now, and for any of you who can answer this question, there's discussions at times that pre-check isn't always open, and I've experienced that myself, and it is frustrating to me, being chairman of this subcommittee. But is it fair to say that if pre-check were expanded dramatically, like it's intended to be, that it would allow those lanes to be open on a more regular basis because the staffing would warrant it? Is that correct? And anyone want to answer that?
No, I think that your point is good, that especially when customers enroll in pre-check, and the enrollment rates tend to be higher the more frequently the customers travel, and they build that expectation of having pre-check available into their schedules in terms of what flights they book and when their meetings end and the like. And it's a service that the TSA is selling, that people are paying for. So people are incredibly frustrated, customers, when they come and find those lines closed. The screening procedures in pre-check are much faster, so the transaction time per customer is lower, and therefore we can get many more customers through the checkpoint both safely, securely, and efficiently, the more people are in pre-check. So we're a big fan of expanding it as well.
Okay, thank you. I take all of you are, is that right? Yes, you're all nodding your head. It seems self-evident.
I think the one issue that we constantly find, pre-check is helping, but as we have continued decrease in staffing, that continues to perpetuate the problem, no matter whether we have pre-check or not. The real issue is that we have to have adequate staffing in TSA.
It's understood, but if it's fair to say, is it not, Mr. Cox, that if you had 20 million people enrolled in pre-check nationwide or 30 million people enrolled in pre-check nationwide, and you have the throughput for pre-check individuals are double the time it is for others, it would have less stress on the system. You have to acknowledge that.
It would definitely have less stress on the system, but if we keep losing 5,000 every several years, that's going to have stress on the system.
And that's something we need to address for sure. Now, with respect to the field service directors, it was really shocking to me that they weren't interacting with some of the airports, especially the major airports, on a regular basis with respect to the staffing allocation models. And so, Ms. Bierstow, could you comment on that for a moment, if you would, please?
Sure. We have a strong and favorable partnership with our local TSA. However, when it comes to staffing allocation model, we encourage TSA to provide greater transparency so we, airports and our airline partners, can better plan and schedule around staffing shortages and the like.
Right. I'm sorry. I referred to them as field service directors, and my able staffer told me, hey, dummy, it's federal service directors, so federal security directors, so excuse me. But one of the things we propose in the bill is that you take the FSDs, if you will, and basically mandate that they meet with the airport directors and the airlines on a regular basis, and that they discuss staffing allocation models, and then certify to us that they're actually doing that. We're asking that to be done on both the local level and on the national level, and I think that we're hoping that's going to have an impact on it. Now, Ms. Callahan, if I understand from speaking to you earlier last week, that you do that now on a regular basis. Is that right?
Yes, sir, we do. In fact, we had a meeting yesterday with our federal security director and his assistants from Albany all the way to Buffalo, a meeting held in Syracuse. 40 of the airports in New York State were at that meeting, where we had an in-depth, detailed briefing on their plans for the summer travel season, how we can work together and collaborate to address some of the issues. And my FSD oversees 14 airports. So to see him on a monthly basis is really incredible that he has the time to do that, but he's very responsive and reactive to issues.
That's good. And one of the things we want to do in this bill is to untie their hands to some extent from an administrative standpoint, because I believe that they need to have more flexibility with respect to their decision-making authority on the front lines. If you get a call from American Airlines or from Chicago and they say, look, we're going to get crushed over the next 3 days, we just sold a bunch of tickets, whatever, let's work together to figure out how to do that. They've got to be able to have the flexibility to grant more overtime. They've got to have the flexibility to be able to bring more people in. And so that's part of what we're contemplating in this bill, and it's based on our discussions with all of you. So I appreciate that. Now, Mr. Cox, Is it one of the things I've been thinking about when you were talking about some of the staffing issues and the attrition rate is if there's some money that's reallocated, if that's the right term, to from other parts of TSA to staffing, would it make sense to take a lot of these individuals that are part-time now and make them full-time, and in so doing, you thereby reduce the attrition rate considerably for some of them at least?
Yes, sir. That would definitely help with that situation. Administrator Neffinger spoke with me yesterday and said his attrition rate with full-time TSOs was around 7 to 8%. But again, it's over 20% in the part-time. People want full-time employment. They will go to other federal jobs or other jobs in the airport seeking full-time employment. So moving that money to getting them full-time would definitely help fix a lot of the problems.
Okay, and of course, the added benefit during this crisis, if you will, that we're having at airports is that moving someone from part-time to full-time doesn't take any additional training.
No,
so
sir,
they
that doesn't. They're ready to go. Many of them in peak times are already working 40 hours a week or possibly more than 40 hours a week, so they are ready to go. There is a cap that's been put on the number of full-time employees, so if Congress could fix that, that would help with a lot of the situation.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Cox. I have so many more questions, but I can't go over my time too much here. So I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Payne, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I ask unanimous consent that 2 letters from AFG to President Obama and Secretary Johnson be inserted in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Let's see. Let's see. Ms. Biersto, okay. In response to the issues at your airport and others around the nation, Secretary Johnson and Administrator Neffinger announced plans to address the lines, including additional resources. Has the administration's response to the wait times within your airports been effective, and have it had a positive effect to this point? I hear a lot that we have the additional resources coming in, but have not heard how it has impacted your wait times in a positive manner, if it has.
Sure, it has. TSA has provided 58 additional officers. The shift of moving over 160 part-time officers to full-times help TSA address the peak periods, both in the AM shifts and the PM shifts. Tripling the amount of overtime allows them to open checkpoints early so they're not behind the curve. Adding morning shifts for TSA screeners and the additional canine teams at O'Hare from around the country have proven incredibly helpful. The canine teams alone are allowing us to move roughly 5,000 passengers a day through pre-check.
Okay, and so what would you say the wait times as opposed to what they are now specifically?
Sure. So at Midway Airport, the wait times with canine teams can be 20 to 30 minutes during peak periods. Without them, they can reach 60 to 90 minutes.
Okay.
We are seeing a great impact on the canines. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, and I have Newark International in my district, and so we really have had the same experiences that you've been having in Chicago based on the hub that we are, and also with the Port Authority having 3 airports under its purview has been a major hang up with the wait times. And we've had the resources moved in Newark as they have in Chicago, and it's dramatically impacted the ability to move passengers in a timely manner. Let's see. Ms. Allen, Within your testimony, you note that the BDOs could be useful in other positions within the screening model. Could you expound for the committee on your thoughts on achieving efficiencies through using the behavior detection officers?
Thank you, Representative Payne. Yes, sir. The behavioral detection officers are trained in perceiving people who are going to do something that is not correct, or maybe illegal, maybe trying to smuggle something, potentially terrorist ties. By having them as the ticket document checkers, they have a personal connection to every single passenger that goes through, and they can screen each individual as opposed to standing to the side or the back of the line where they're observing behavior. They can better detect people who may need additional screening or discussion.
Okay, thank
This is a model that's used overseas that's been quite effective there.
Okay. My time is winding down, but I just wanted to say to Mr. Cox, all throughout this discussion over the past several weeks, that I've kept the TSOs in mind and have made sure that my colleagues have some idea of what they go through and the strain that they're under based on these long wait times as well, and that they are our last line of defense, and we need to make sure that they have the resources that they need in order to do the job well. We can't afford them not to. They have to be right 100% of the time. So just wanted to put that on the record, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. The chair will now recognize other members of the subcommittee and then Ms. McSally for 5 minutes of questions that they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with our committee rules and practice, I plan to recognize members who are present at the start of the hearing by seniority on the subcommittee, and then others such as Ms. McSally who are visiting the committee this morning. Those coming in later will be recognized in order of their arrival. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. This is obviously a very important subject to us, and I'm glad to see y'all because I've got some important questions I want to ask you. I have the honor and privilege of representing the 1st Congressional District of Georgia. That includes the entire coast of Georgia. Georgia is unique in the sense that we have a lot of small airports, a lot of rural areas. We also, as you know, have Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, which is the busiest airport in the country, in the world. And that presents a dilemma, but I want to ask you some questions about that, and I'm very interested to know your responses to this. What we've been hearing and what I've been hearing from a lot of the airport officials is that there exists somewhat of a disconnect between the local TSA officials, the airlines, the airport officials, and then upper management, that management in TSA up here in Washington, D.C., if you will. Have any of you experienced that? Or can you comment on that? Ms. Allen or whoever wants to comment, just very quickly because I got a bunch here.
Yes, Mr. Carter. I think it's really, each airport is different. There's a saying in our industry, you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. So the relationships that exist are really local and dependent on the people within the organizations at those airports. I imagine in Atlanta, it's much more difficult than it is in Syracuse, New York, where we have access to our FSDs and AFSDs and the airlines on a regular day-to-day basis. That's what I can offer.
Okay. Anyone else?
Representative Carter, Tucson previously had an FSD until 2 years ago. Then we became a spoke airport. We have an excellent relationship with our local screening managers and our local personnel. They now have many layers to go through, and models and requirements are dictated, and I can't personally say from where, but certainly above their ability to be able to react quickly to issues on the ground. That's what we experienced during our peak period in February and March. They were only allowed to open the pre-check lane after they had opened a second standard lane because of staffing. Then they could open a pre-check lane. When they opened the pre-check lane, the lines were cut in half, and they were not the full length of our terminal front. So having the ability to do that would be helpful.
Great, great. Let me ask you, has anyone had any experience with private security? Any of you have had that experience?
In a few airports that we serve have private security.
I'm sorry, say again?
Sorry. Oh, thank you. A few of the airports that American serves have private security.
Can you give me your impression? I mean, what's been the results?
I'll just use San Francisco as an example because that's probably the one that I'm most familiar with. Because the privatized airports, the way the privatized model is today, follows the same procedures and staffing allocation models as other airports.
Okay, I hope that my colleagues heard that. They have to follow the same rules and regulations. The training's the same. Everything's the same. So and TSA oversees it, correct? Oversee. Okay.
That's my understanding.
All right. I'm sorry. Continue.
So we really see that as long as the operation is properly resourced, we're able to have both effective and efficient screening in either model. It's really the key is making sure that the resource allocation meets the peak needs of the operation.
Okay. The screening partnership program, Mr. Cox, I'm going to ask you directly. Can you give me an idea why it appears to me, and from what I have heard, that they do a better job and that they save money on top of that? You had any experience with this?
Sir, we believe that the TSOs that are employed by the federal government, number one, it's a professionalized workforce. They do a great job. They have been trained to do that. And I think their record speaks very clearly for themselves. Since 9/11, we have not had acts of terrorism in this country. We had a privatized workforce on 9/11, and we saw what happened. This country was brought to its knees. The government has been taking care of that, been doing that. Part of our real problem right now is a lack of staffing, not enough staff to do the work properly.
And I understand and I appreciate what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm convinced that the private industry can do this just as well with oversight with TSA and save money and improve customer service and decrease the long lines that we are experiencing at our airports. And and they go through the same training. All of the TSA still has the oversight, the responsibility. I think it's unfair to compare what happened on 9/11 between privatization and being run by the public. I mean, that took us all. We were all asleep at the wheel then. You have to admit that.
I agree. I was watching Fox News last Sunday, and one of the commentators was at the San Francisco airport, was complaining about the long lines, the rudeness of the officers, and the various incidents that was going on, and said, this is a classic example of why it needs to be privatized. And I busted out laughing because it is a privatized airport, and all the problems that she was referring to was at a privatized airport. She wasn't in Atlanta or Miami, one of those that was not privatized. She was in San Francisco complaining, saying it was a classic example of why it should be privatized.
Well, you know, what I'd like to see is some comparisons. I mean, this is something that is very important, and if we can improve it, because you mentioned the disconnect, or I brought up the disconnect, and you commented on the disconnect between Washington and the local officials. This is something that we've got to work on, and this is what happens when the bureaucracy gets out of control. And that's what I think we're headed with, and we're at right now with the TSA, is the bureaucracy is out of control. We need to get it under control. Mr. Chairman, I know I've gone past my time, but this is just a very important subject to me, so I appreciate your input on that. Mr. Cox, what you're telling me, I'm having different views expressed to me by other people, so I'm going to continue to search on this and continue to try to see what we can come up with. Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. I ask unanimous consent that the gentle lady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, be allowed to sit on the dais and participate in this hearing, and without objection, so ordered.
I express my appreciation to the chairman and the ranking member for your courtesies. This is a committee that I have a great affection for because I indicated before that the TSOs are the first line of defense, if you will, for the neighborhood, for the nation's aviation security. So let me thank all of you for your presence here. I have some direct questions, and then I want to raise a series of questions with Mr. Cox. Thank you so very much for representing very fine professional staff, of which I want to be more professional, less part-time, more recruitment, increased salaries, and the numbers that you would like to have. So I would ask the representative from the Chicago, Illinois, the Admiral was here just yesterday, and understand that the wait has gone to 15 minutes. I'd like to see what, you're obviously here today, Thursday. I'd like to hear your assessment. Has the lines improved, the time and the waits improved?
Oh, considerably, ma'am. We've seen wait times less than 15 minutes.
So there's been a fix, if you will, and obviously we have to see that it's a consistent fix.
A permanent fix.
And that's even better to hear that's a permanent fix. He's added more, as I understand, there's a task force, and he's added more employees. Is that correct?
And may I correct?
Yeah.
It's a temporary right now. We need permanent fix.
Oh, so you were saying we need a permanent fix.
Right.
Well, that will come, and the temporary is that you've added more personnel. Is that correct?
Yes, the extended overtime allowed for increased shifts, peak periods.
Are you aware that we expect about 700 to be in by July, and so you would probably get some additional TSOs?
I am aware, thank you.
And that would probably help their circumstances. Is there a problem with the baggage check down? There's the screening, and then there's a baggage check. Is there a problem on the baggage check area as well?
It's not surfaced at our level. We can certainly find out additional information.
Right, but thank you. But that problem has been at least relieved for a moment, and we expect to continue to work with you for that.
And Midway Airport is still waiting for additional resources.
Additional resources. Would you say that your TSOs are professional, your management level?
Yes, absolutely.
And they were attempting to correct the problem?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you. The airlines, well, I see there are other airports. Is there an airline representative here, I think, from American Airlines? Have you been able to work by way of getting your concerns to TSA? Should we facilitate a better communication protocol when there are concerns?
We've been working very collaboratively and effectively with the TSA, both at the headquarters level with Admiral Neffinger, as well as at the local level. So the airlines are taking action in collaboration with the TSA and also promoting many of the actions that the TSA is suggesting and already taking, and also the actions that are contained in Chairman Katko's proposed legislation, which we're in favor of as well.
Which means that you'd be willing to pay for overtime for TSOs?
Right now, we really want to get more transparency into the staffing model and understand how resources are being deployed. We need to make sure that we have an analytical model that puts resources where they need to be to meet the peak demands of our customers.
And I agree with you. And more flexibility for the FSDs? Would that be helpful?
In cooperation with their airline partners, yes.
Would you join with us? Because I heard the point being made that we need more data regarding the baggage fees. And so I think there should be an assessment and a study coming from both ends, the airlines and TSA, on the baggage fees as to whether or not they do increase the number of bags coming through by hand carry. Would you work with us on that?
May I comment on the checked baggage in general? The airlines have been charging checked baggage fees since 2008, and the line waits we're experiencing with TSA this year are unprecedented. So I think it would be inaccurate to say that bag fees are leading to the current line waits that we are experiencing. You mentioned the baggage.
Can I interject for a moment? We note that we've had a sizable increase in passenger travel between 2008, already between 2011 and 2016. My only question is, we all have our different perspectives. I'm not offering any perspective. I'm just offering, would you participate and collaborate on getting the data that we need to understand the question better?
We're interested in collaborating to solve the problem. I do want to note that baggage screening, as you noted, is also a core function of TSA. And even though we had heard from my colleague from Chicago that we haven't had severe issues there, some of our other airports have experienced significant backlogs, in some cases even worse than what we're experiencing.
What we want to do is fix the problem.
Like in Miami and at Los Angeles.
Right. We want to fix the problem, and I know that you have hubs like Miami. So we want to fix the problem. Let me quickly move to Mr. Cox, if I might. Mr. Cox, I've traveled to many of your airports. I take the opportunity to speak to TSOs everywhere I go, including supervisors and managers. And I will say that I ran into one individual, his name is Vincent, who a World War II veteran, came and was in a wheelchair, was just dropped off by his family, was traveling by himself, and he said, I don't want anybody else. I want a TSO, TSO, TSO. That means to come out to the curb. And so a TSO went out to the curb and took him with the wheelchair all the way through security, et cetera, getting to the gate, getting down to the door of the plane, and he noted that this proud World War II veteran who had been dropped off by his family members, I'm sure they meant well, he could not walk. And your TSO agent lifted him up and took him and put him on the plane. I think these are the stories that need to be told. If the chairman would yield me just a moment here to just
Ms. Jackson Lee, just want to let you know we're kind of crunched for time, and Ms. McSally needs to go too.
May I just get this last question?
Votes are coming up, so please hurry.
Thank you. I support a professional staff, not privatization. Would you respond to that quickly, please?
We clearly believe that a professional staff, that our government employees, that this is an inherently governmental function to keep the American public safe. These people are well trained. They do a great job. They love their jobs. They just need to have adequate staffing to be able to do their jobs and to do them properly. And I think if the committee really wants to get legislation that tries to get the input and the collaboration, that it would be important that AFGE and the employees that it represents be included in the legislation as one of the partners trying to resolve the problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so very much. More funding is important. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ranking Member, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson Lee. The chair now recognizes the patient, Ms. McSally from Arizona. Ms. McSally?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the roundtable last week and in your testimony today, we heard one of the main issues is flexibility for the FSDs, that they can make decisions on the ground, but not just for the FSDs, for the supervisors in spoke airports like Tucson. Admiral Neffringer was asked this question yesterday, and he said he has given that flexibility to FSDs. I felt like I was listening to parallel universes that were in complete contradiction of each other. He believes that they already have that flexibility. It is unbelievable to me that it would take an act of Congress to actually direct them to provide flexibility. This is just leadership 101. But he sincerely believes he's given that authority. I specifically asked him yesterday about this and the spoke airports like Tucson, and he said they have all the authority they need. Maybe they're just not getting the message. He's just recently removed Kelly Hogan, who potentially is the barrier to this direction being communicated down to all of you. But I want to say we need your immediate feedback. He gave his promise yesterday that he was going to follow up on this and make sure they understood his guidance, that they have that flexibility. Ms. Allen, can you share, you've given some examples. If we had the flexibility with our senior TSA rep on the ground in the last few months, what other instances were their hands tied, and what would have changed? What have you've been able to do there in order to alleviate the problems that we're having?
Thank you, Representative McSally. When we were experiencing the extreme lines, the challenge that our local representative with TSA had, which is not an FSD, as we're spoke, as you noted, was the fact that there are specific models that certain throughput has to go, passengers per hour have to go through the lane before the second lane can be opened up, and that with one standard lane, then a second standard lane had to be opened before pre-check, where pre-check is the quick resolution because the lane was cut in half when the pre-check lane was opened.
And that direction you think came from D.C. or Phoenix? Do you know?
Phoenix came down when the passengers were calling the media from the lines, and the media began showing up. It all exploded during the week.
Is that
and that's
still
when
the case?
Things changed.
Is that still the case, that they have to do the second line before pre-check?
With staffing, yes, ma'am. They're limited on staffing and therefore can't open the pre-check because it requires more people, and I'm sorry, can't tell you exactly how many more than a standard lane.
Okay, great. Are there any other situations where you saw their hands were tied, that they could have maybe moved, say, BDOs to be, checking IDs or something else, had they been given more flexibility locally?
Yes, ma'am. We've been asking for BDOs to be document checkers since the problems first started with the holidays prior to our season coming, and our FSD in Phoenix refused, saying that it was important for them to be observing the line, the people in line, as opposed to being able to be document checkers. Okay. I think all that has changed by the Admiral, and we appreciate that greatly.
Okay, great, thanks. Ms. Beard, so, you said you appreciated the assistance. There was a big media attention to the problems at Chicago, and then additional agents and canine teams came to the rescue. However, they were pulled from somewhere else. Yes. What we heard from the roundtable last week is the feeling is that this sort of squeaky wheel, let's move assets around to whoever's on TV today, allows, I think one of the airport managers said something along the lines of, we all get a turn to be the worst, is that kind of model, which means that you're just going to create a crisis somewhere else. So I am concerned about that this is more like a whack-a-mole scenario as opposed to a strategic model that's going to address all these issues, and we're not going to be robbing from medium and small airports in order to address the bigger airports that end up on TV. Can anyone sort of provide some perspectives on that and concerns that we shouldn't be reactive, we should be much more strategic on this?
If I can give an example, ma'am, the passenger screening canines, for example, which we borrow and have been reallocated from other airports, those kinds of resources really need to be allocated based on airport passenger throughput and the security risk, right? So those are the kinds of things that TSA should consider.
Great, thank you. Mr. Cox, yesterday I asked Admiral Neffinger about something that was really troubling that I discovered this week, which is we have instances of at least 250 through April that have been reported where TSA agents have been pulled away from their primary mission, which is the security of air travel and the efficiency and safety of passengers in air travel, to support things like presidential campaign rallies, and we've heard reports of other events, concerts and sporting events. This is nowhere in their core competency. And so could you please comment on your perspectives on whether when somebody signs up to be a TSA agent and a TSO, whether they expected to be at a campaign rally or whether they expected to be doing their core mission, and how you all feel about that?
We expected them to do their core mission, to do their core work. As with any situation, you do understand the workers don't get to drive the train. They just show up and do what the boss man tells them to do. I know our TSOs, they want to be at the airport doing their mission and taking care of it. It upsets them when those lines are long and passengers are waiting because passengers get more frustrated with them. Right. And I would say, if you really want to resolve a lot of these problems, you can talk to FSDs, you can talk to the administrator, but Congress probably needs to mandate that there be some work groups made up of TSOs themselves. The people who actually do the work can tell you how to improve the processes. I know American Airlines does that all the time. I know all these airports do that. We need to be talking to the frontline employees, and they could give a lot of solutions. They can't necessarily give more resources or more people, but I'm sure they know how to improve the work processes.
Great, thank you. I agree with you, and look, we need to make sure that large-scale events have safety and security, but there are other ways to do that than to be pulling agents that is core responsibility is the safety of air travel in order to do that. So I'll be following up on that, and I appreciate the leverage, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. McSally. I would like to thank the witnesses for their thoughtful testimony. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for all of you. and we will be asking to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Before we close, a couple of observations. First of all, if we had more time, we could go on this all day long. But what's the beauty of this hearing was that we had the input of all of the stakeholders at the table and those sitting in the audience last week, which helped us become very prepared for this testimony. And, you know, I think a lot of times people look at Congress and say Congress is broken, nothing gets done, they're not listening to us. I think what's transpired over last week is that we looked at a crisis, we got the stakeholders in here, we listened to you, we crafted a bill and responding to what you have to say, and it's going to have immediate impact if we can get it passed. And I'm excited about that. The frustration is that we're moving these things and we're getting this stuff done. And so I ask all of you to be advocates with the Senate to tell the Senate to do their job as well, because we don't want to hear any more of these wait time issues. And when we can act like this in a collaborative manner, that's when Congress really works. And we got to make sure that process comes with its positive conclusion. So thank you all for coming here. I know it's an early flight for some of you. And if it's any consolation, we were working until about 12:30 last night, and I was up at 5 this morning. So we all had busy days. So thank you all very much. And
Mr. Chairman, just
sure.
Just an observation before we close. Ms. McSally, you should have not left Homeland. I see you more now. Huh? Oh,
Just
okay.
gave up the chair of the other subcommittee to move over to another subcommittee.
Well, we miss you there.
I'm here, baby.
All right.
The committee stands adjourned. Thank you all so very much.
Our Road to the White House coverage will continue this afternoon with a Bernie Sanders campaign rally taking place in California. He'll be speaking to supporters in Ventura, California. That state's set to hold its presidential primary on Tuesday, June 7th. You can see Senator Sanders live at 4 p.m. Eastern, about 15 minutes from now, on our companion network, C-SPAN 3. Here on C-SPAN, more from the Golden State as Hillary Clinton will be meeting with voters in San Jose. Her rally starts live at 4:30 Eastern. Earlier today, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump secured the necessary number of delegates to clinch the GOP nomination. Tomorrow, Mr. Trump will hold a campaign rally in San Diego. You can see that live tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on C-SPAN. And while Republicans and Democrats are holding their party conventions in July, this coming weekend, the Libertarian Party has its national convention taking place in Orlando. Coverage starts Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, with a candidates debate. Sunday, we'll watch as the party chooses its presidential and vice presidential nominees. And right now, the Libertarian Party is the only third party that will appear on the ballot in all 50 states in November. Live Road to the White House coverage on the C-SPAN networks.
Madam Secretary, we proudly give 72 of our delegate votes to the next President of the United States.
This Memorial Day weekend on American History TV on C-SPAN 3. Saturday evening at 6 Eastern on the Civil War.
Sherman could not have agreed more, and by the time he captured Atlanta in September 1864, his thoughts on the matter had fully matured. Once again, a rebel army had been defeated, and another major city had fallen, and still the Confederates would not give up. So, rather than continue the futile war against people, he would now wage war against property.
Georgia Historical Society President Todd Gross on Union General William Tecumseh Sherman, arguing that Sherman's March to the Sea campaign was hard war rather than total war, and that his targets were carefully selected to diminish Southern resolve. Sunday evening at 6 on American Artifacts. Take a tour with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, viewing some of the oldest rooms in the Capitol, like the Republican leader's suite, conference room, and his private office.
And I had the good fortune to actually be here on August 28, 1963, when Martin Luther King made the I Have a Dream speech. Now, I confess I couldn't hear a word because I was down at this end of the mall. He was on the Lincoln Memorial looking out at throngs, literally thousands and thousands of people. But you knew you were in the presence of something really significant.
Then at 8 on the presidency, former aides to Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon talk about the role of the presidents during the Vietnam era.
LBJ anguished about that war every single day, and that is not an overstatement. The daily body counts, the calls either to or from the Situation Room, often at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, to see if the carrier pilots had returned.
Historian H.W. Brands is joined by former LBJ aide Tom Johnson and former Nixon aide Alexander Butterfield to explore the president's foreign policies during the conflict. Monday afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern on Real America, our 5-part series on the 1975 Church Committee hearings convened to investigate the intelligence activities of the CIA, FBI, IRS, and the NSA. With testimony by CIA Director William Colby, the FBI's James Adams, NSA Director General Lou Allen, FBI informants, and others.
We are here to review the major findings of our full investigation of FBI domestic intelligence, including the COINTEL program and other programs aimed at domestic targets, FBI surveillance of law-abiding citizens and groups, political abuses of FBI intelligence, and several specific cases of unjustified intelligence operations.
For the complete American History TV weekend schedule, go to cspan.org. Earlier today, U.S. Forces Commander Lieutenant General Charles Brown held a briefing about the ongoing military operations against ISIS. He spoke with reporters from Southeast Asia through Skype. This is about 45 minutes.
Good morning, General. Just want to confirm you can hear us.
I have you loud and clear.
Got you loud and clear as well. Good morning, everybody. We're pleased to be joined today by Lieutenant General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., who is the commander of U.S. Air Force's Central Command, giving us an update today on Operation Inherent Resolve. General, we'll turn it over to you for any opening comments, and we'll come back here for questions.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the men and women of the 60 nations that make up the coalition, over 60 nations that make up the coalition supporting Operation Inherent Resolve and also Resolute support. It's my distinct honor to serve as the commander of United States Air Force's Central Command and as the Combined Forces Air Component Commander for Central Command. As a CFAC, I'm charged to lead and be part of our 19-nation air coalition in support of OIR that is committed to defeating Daesh, while helping set the conditions for improved security and stability in the region. In parallel, I'm responsible for delivering air power to Afghanistan and across the 20-nation CENTCOM area responsibility. The coalition, whether in resolute support or inherent resolve, continues to do phenomenal work making air power look easy. As you likely heard before, we're conducting the most precise air campaign in history. We're able to attrit Daesh and its capabilities anytime, anywhere, while taking very deliberate steps to minimize impact to the civilian population. There is no doubt Coalition Air Power has and continues to dramatically dismantle Daesh's ability to fight and conduct operations in Iraq and Syria. Coalition airstrikes are effectively targeting critical Daesh capabilities as we continue to see positive results. When I came before you, this group last, I highlight the notable success in targeting Daesh financial resources, particularly successful strikes on oil facilities and on monetary centers. These strikes have definitely had the desired effect, negatively affecting Daesh's ability to pay fighters and fund operations. In addition to the continued strikes on Daesh's financial means, most recently, the focus has been on logistic and command and control targets in both Iraq and Syria. The upcoming video of two recent strikes in Raqqa, Syria, and Rupa, Iraq, demonstrate the capabilities Coalition Air Power brings to the table on a daily basis. Can you go ahead and please play the video? Now, the strikes are an important operational element in advance of or in support of ground maneuver. This first part of the video shows a B-52 strike in Raqqa destroying a Daesh weapons cache with 5 precision-guided munitions. This is one of many strikes conducted to degrade Daesh's logistics capability. The second part of the video shows a strike by US F-16s and French Mirage 2000s that were tasked dynamically to destroy a Daesh defensive fighting position. They employed 3 precision-guided munitions to successfully destroy the target. This strike was conducted to disrupt Daesh's defenses as the Iraq forces moved to retake Rupa. It is strikes like these that, in my perspective, put more pressure on Daesh, decreases their ability to place and employ IEDs and/or mount an offensive attack. As the air component, we are actively working to keep Daesh on the defense, enable ground forces to maneuver against as little resistance as possible. While there is consistent progress and positive momentum, now is not the time to pat ourselves on the back. There is still work to be done. As the Air Coalition, we will do our part to persistently strike key targets in the deep fight, and will continue to integrate Coalition Air Power with ground force maneuver. Regardless of the pace of operation on the ground, we will use Coalition Air Power, its operational reach and flexibility, its precision and lethality, and its constant presence and responsiveness to pressure, to destroy, and eventually defeat Daesh. And with that, Jeff, I'm ready to take questions.
We're going to do Phil Donahue style today, so I'll start with Lita.
Hi, General. It's Lolita Baldor with the Associated Press. Can you give us a sort of a more detailed sense of the fight in Fallujah and what issues or problems the coalition is having in trying to do airstrikes there, considering the number of citizens in the city? Are you seeing a lot of citizens leaving? Do you have a sense of how many are still there? And do you have any sense of the number of enemy fighters that are still in the city? Thank you.
Well, from an air perspective, I don't have a really good sense on really the number of fighters that are in the area, but I'll tell you kind of how we actually do the campaign in support of the operations there. And so from a broad perspective, we have increased the number of strikes in Fallujah in comparison to other areas in the campaign over the course of the past week. And the way we do that is through the use of our Joint Operations Center that sits, in this case, particularly probably Baghdad, that's working and they sit side by side with the Iraqis to identify the particular targets we're going to strike dynamically in coordination with the Iraqis as the Iraqi forces move. From a operational standpoint, what I have seen is that you do see positive momentum and movement into Fallujah as they execute. As far as the civilians, I can't really speak to because I'm not watching that as closely. But I will tell you that one of the things we do as we work with the strikes in coordination with the Iraqis or the deliberate strikes we execute is to take great care to minimize any type of civilian casualties. But we really haven't seen, that I've seen, great movement of civilians out of the city at this point.
One quick follow-up just on a separate topic. There's been a lot of talk from the Russians about wanting to coordinate more with the U.S. over Syria. Can you say whether or not you've encountered any difficulties with Russian aircraft in the airspace over Syria, either getting in the way or other problems that would lead to further discussions about possibly considering some type of coordination?
Really, if you look at the operations, really since the Russians started flying back in September, and even with the MOU that's been in the place, we've really seen very little or any issues with the Russians in execution, and primarily because of where our objectives and their objectives. Although what they said was one thing, is they were going to go after Daesh, which is probably not the case. It's mostly in support of the regime. So we don't necessarily fly in the same locations. If there's one area that we probably come closer together, it's in northwest Syria, north of Aleppo and around Aleppo. We tend to fly north of Aleppo, and they tend to fly a bit south. So by and large, we have not had any issues when we really look at the MU, which is designed for safety of flight. We don't do any coordination with the Russians. We don't necessarily have any real concerns. I will tell you, we have a very professional phone calls. They go back and forth between the coalition, the phone line we have here with the Russians, to work through the MOU to ensure safety of flight for the coalition, all the coalition, and as well as our operations. So we do not have a safety of flight issue with the Russians.
Hi, General. This is Marcus Weisgerber with Defense One. I wanted to ask you, there have been some reports about the OV-10 actually making an appearance again in the skies over the battlefield in Iraq and Syria. So basically, I wanted to ask, what are you using the plane? Can you confirm the report that it's out there? What are you using the plane for? And I guess, what is the future of the OV-10 in this mission that you have?
Well, that was actually not done under the air component. It was done under some special ops and a kind of a test program. That happened earlier in the year, and to be honest with you, it was a short term, and we haven't. I don't have any real details to be able to share with you as far as what the current status is, since we weren't necessarily working at real time from our location here.
As a follow-up, there was a debate over at AFCENT years ago, 5 to 8 years ago, about whether or not planes like the OV-10 or the Super Tucano or the AT-6 have a place in the skies over Iraq, Afghanistan, elsewhere where there's a permissive environment. Where do you stand on that issue? Is this something that's even being considered anymore? And just kind of what are your thoughts on whether or not planes like that could be helpful?
Well, the example I would use is the A-29s that are in Afghanistan right now that the Afghan Air Force are flying. And so it's a platform like that has a pretty robust capability, pretty easy to fly, pretty easy to maintain, which is really a great platform for a smaller Air Force that's coming up. So in a permissive environment, that airplane works perfectly. In a non-permissive environment, it's probably not as capable a platform.
Hi, General. It's Courtney Cubey with NBC News. I have two questions. First is just something that you said towards the end of your opening statement that I found kind of curious. You said that regardless of the pace of the operations on the ground, the air campaign would continue. What did you mean by that? Are you anticipating some sort of a slowdown of the pace of operations on the ground?
No, I mean, there's times where, based on the pace of our partners, where some things are going faster and some days are going slower. But from my perspective as the air component, we have the flexibility in the range to continue to put pressure on it on a daily basis. And so my goal as the air component is to actually put pressure on Daesh wherever they are, whether there's a ground force there or not. And so if things get slowed down, or if there's changes based on weather, those kinds of things, then I still believe the air component can take advantage of our capabilities to continue to put pressure on Daesh and not give them any respite or sanctuary in any location. So I'm always pressing really hard to use our air power as much as possible. And personally, I get frustrated sometimes where we're not using our capability to its full capability. We do by and large, but I'm always looking to improve upon how we're doing business.
And then if I could also ask you about an announcement that the Kurds made earlier this week about the very beginning of a campaign to go move south towards Raqqa with tens of thousands of troops. Can you give us any kind, I understand not wanting to give the ISIS a preview of what you're planning, but can you give us any sort of an idea of what